Mike there. All right.
What do you mean?
Movie bus specialist Phil and John are back, and we are in for an interesting episode tonight. That is for sure. We are up to number 66 as we count down our favorite 100 movies of all time. And the only thing that Edward Scissorhands and Akira have in common is that one of us, didn't like one of these movies. And that is John did not like Edward Scissorhands, and I did not like Akira, whatever it is. I don't care how you say it, how you pronounce it. I didn't like it. At least you could pronounce Scissorhands. But this will make for an interesting topic because we have not had this happen yet. It took 35 episodes for us to both hit a point where we're like, not for me. So that should bring out the beauty of what this podcast is supposed to be about, which is discussion and not trolling and making the other person feel inferior. But that's going to be really hard for me tonight.
Yeah, I know, Phil. And I knew I was going out on a limb with this one because of your approach to anime in general. But this movie has a very special place in my heart for what it offers. So I'm looking forward to discussing it. Edward Scissorhands, on the other hand, man, Tim Burton just doesn't do it for me.
So we'll talk. How do you pronounce it? I heard it all day today. Now, Akira.
Yeah.
Akira. They kind of say it like the Akira.
Yeah.
But anyway, Tim Burton doesn't do it for me at all either. I like two of his movies. It is this one and it is Ed Wood. And I think Big Fish is pretty good. Other than that, I think every single movie he has made is poop. I know I've been saying that a lot on this series lately, but that's how I really feel about Tim Burton's movies. I hate them. I think they are so bad. His Planet of the Apes remake is an abomination. That is one of the most insulting creations of all time. And that counts everything. That is an insulting creation, not just movies, everything. I hate that movie. But Edward Scissorhands hits me on an emotional level, and maybe it's just like a nostalgia thing. I don't know, but we'll talk about it. But we're going to talk about yours first because I don't care what you say. Edward Scissorhands is more popular, even if Akira has this really big cult following. You said it. Anime doesn't do it for me, but what is it about this movie that does it for you?
So Akira's kind of a nostalgic pick for me when it comes to my list. Do I view it as like the cinematic masterpiece? No. But I think the timing when I saw Akira for the first time really kind of opened my eyes to how I viewed cinema in general. And a lot of that comes down to the fact that before seeing Akira, my exposure to anime was pretty limited, as were most people's in North America and Europe prior to Akira being released. Akira is a very important movie in anime for what it did for the medium of anime, and that's a big thing I want to make very clear today. Anime is not a genre. Anime is a medium for presenting a story that consists of many different genres. And while there are more genres we closely associate with anime itself is just a way of presenting a story.
Agreed.
And that is something that I think a lot of people don't view anime with. And it's why a lot of people have kind of these negative connotations for anime as a whole, when it's an incredibly varied medium with different stories from all different types of genres. But it's why it's really hard to convince some people to watch anime.
So here's my thing. It took me forever to start watching the Ghibli movies, and I love most of the Ghibli movies. I also think that a lot of ones that are really highly revered are terrible, like My Neighbor Totoro. Take me eyes, but don't take me shirt, because that movie is terrible. But I agree. And when I say this genre does nothing for me, when I'm talking about Akira, I'm talking about the cyberpunk genre more than anything. That genre for me, I don't like The Matrix. So if I don't like The Matrix, how am I supposed to sit through this movie? Do you know what I'm saying? Like The Matrix is like the iconic cyberpunk movie. And I don't even like that. I'm just not that. I just don't like the style. I don't find it entertaining. I think it removes too much of the emotion that goes into the characters. And I think it tries to be cool more than anything else. It doesn't do it for me. Anime, I agree. It totally depends on what the story is. I'm not really big into like this like late 80s, early 90s type anime. It feels dated to me, and since I didn't grow up with it, it's something that's just kind of weird to me. But like some of the later movies where like it doesn't look like 2D Dragon Ball Z images all the time, I'm more into that. This didn't do it for me on so many levels, though, that it's more than just the anime or cyberpunk or all. I didn't connect with a single character on this. I said to you before the podcast began, for 2 hours, I didn't feel hate. I didn't feel love. I didn't feel anything. I felt like I just existed for 2 hours. The movie started. The movie ended. That was it. And then I was like, great, I got to go podcast about this and I got to think of something to say. But I am struggling for the words. I really am.
Yeah, I totally get that. And I know you don't like cyberpunk. You've expressed it many times. Like you don't like The Matrix. I'm not a big Matrix fan either. You don't like Blade Runner. Mm-hmm. And it's
hate Blade Runner. I just want to say that. Hate Blade Runner.
So I get that aspect of it. With Akira, for me, I'm not as big into the cyberpunk either. I also am not a big Matrix fan by any means. And cyberpunk, to me, has to be the right balance of the dystopian fiction with the science fiction in it for it to really work for me. And I find that Akira does get to that point where it leans into what the medium of anime allows it to do really well, at the same time presenting these cyberpunk and dystopian fiction themes in a pretty digestible way, even 30 years later at this point.
Yeah, and it's not so much like that whole how do I watch Blade Runner and not cry? Jordan, I did cry because I was suffering. I cried all 5 times I watched it. I suffered every single time. I cried. I hated it. But it's not so much even the like I thought they did pretty well with the whole like dystopian style and all of that. Mm-hmm. I thought it was interesting that this was set at another time where they were getting ready to host the Olympics, which I had just last week watched from Up on Poppy Hill, which I thought was a great Ghibli movie. And that one is also about like Tokyo coming back from World War II and getting ready to host the Olympics. Like they're very much taking what happened in World War II, but now blowing it up to an extreme of, so much further. It's gone so much further now. World War III, pretty much the end of the world. What really did it for me was just like these little guys running around, these little kids with old man faces. Didn't do it for me. Kanata versus Tetsuo. Thank you. Didn't do it for me. Like their relationship didn't build to anything for me. It didn't earn it for me. And so that made it harder for me as I was going through it. Like, it's one thing of like, you can really get through this, like if you can start to open my eyes up to like what's going on here. Like there's plenty of genres that I don't like, but then every now and then I'll just watch a movie in that genre and my mind will be blown. It didn't grab, like the opening was good. And then it just started to lose me. And by the time things started to feel like they were getting more interesting, I had been lost.
Right. And that, I understand that argument a lot because the middle section of this is a lot of what's happening right now. Mm-hmm. Because we open up with this incredibly animated highway bike fight, which is, it's thrilling. It keeps you engaged. It shows you a lot of this world and like what the world is that it's come to at this point, because we don't know why the world's gone this way. We don't know why we have Neo Tokyo instead of Tokyo, other than we saw an explosion at this point. We see that there are street gangs kind of like in the vein of something like the Road Warrior at this point, fighting it out on the highway. And it's beautifully animated. And a lot of that comes down to the fact that Akira had the largest budget for an anime film of all time when it was made. It had a $10 million budget. It's an adaptation of a 6-part, it's like a 2,000-page manga. And the writer of the manga was actually brought in to be the director of the movie. And it is 1988. Like, this is the biggest year for anime breaching into the West. This is the same year as Grave of the Fireflies and My Neighbor Totoro. So this is kind of like that big moment where anime breaks into the West. And a lot of that has to do with the fact that these three movies are kind of a very different genres each. And what Akira's hitting on is it's 1988. People are loving this science fiction, dystopian fiction, cyberpunk genre at this point. And yeah, there are some things in this movie that aren't explained enough.
Mm-hmm.
There are things where it's like, okay, we understand World War III happened, and it was brought about because Akira is a person with some sort of telekinetic powers.
Yeah.
And we get that aspect, but it's not quite flushed out enough for the movie to make sense as a whole, unless you're really diving deep into it.
I did not dive deep into it. That's for certain. I very much sat on the outside and watched this game from the bench. That's how I felt. I do agree with what you're saying. I think a lot of this stuff, this kind of reminds me of like back in like the late 90s, early 2000s, when everything wanted to do what Final Fantasy was doing. So they made a half-assed version of that. And I'm not saying this is half-assed, don't get me wrong, but they would make a half-assed version where they would take really cool moments from the Final Fantasy games, but forget to fill in all the little stuff that made those games epic. To me, that's what this was doing a little bit, not in a half-assed way, but just in a, they're not telling me, they're not filling in all the details because they're too busy focusing on the big moments. They're not focusing enough on the smaller moments. I've been watching Evangelion because I'm trying to catch up so that I can actually understand end of Evangelion in a year when we finally watch it. And so I'm watching that, and I felt that way at the beginning, and now they're slowly starting to get to that point where I'm like, I like their relationship that they're building. I like what they're doing with this guy and this girl, and I like how this is moving forward. This movie, by the end of it, I was like, wait a second, that's right. That girl is actually a character in this. Oh, there it is. Like, there just felt like there was no heart to it. And I think that's why I don't really like the cyberpunk genre in general a lot of the time. And I know Jordan's saying he cried during Blade Runner, but I felt no emotion during that movie except anger because I'd been told so many times to watch it and watch this version. It's better, I swear. No, it isn't. It's just as bad as all the other versions. But with this movie, I got no heart. I got no heart. I got a lot of cool looking things, and that was nice. But as somebody who's not a fan of the genre and not a fan necessarily of the medium, not seeking out the medium at least, it just didn't hit me the way that I was really hoping. I mean, this was on my list even before John put it on his list. This was on my like watch list, and it just didn't hit me.
Yeah, and part of that is like these characters don't feel fully developed, and that's because a lot of the time I feel like a lot of this movie is set up in like the world building rather than the characters. And it's really hard when you take such an expansive story, condense it to 2 hours to flush both of those things out in a way that really reaches a lot of people in the audience, because they definitely sacrifice some character in this for the world building, because there's so much world building that it's hard to remember the names of characters who are not Kanata or Tetsuo.
Is the other one's name just K?
Yes.
Yes. Okay, good.
But not to be confused with Kai.
Yes, and that's where I was confused. And then Kanata, I assume, starts with a K based on the Japanese alphabet. So I'm assuming that's a K, not a C. So it's like Kanata, Kai, and K. Okay, sounds good to me. See, I didn't get like the motorbike aspect of this. I didn't get any, like, I sat there and yeah, the visuals, not for nothing, like, even as somebody who's not a big anime person, the visuals are pretty beautiful and stunning at certain points of this movie. Like, there's certain moments of this where it's just like, all right, like they knew what they were doing. I'm always very impressed by these late 80s, like Nausicaa and what's the other one? The one that's not actually Nausicaa is the one that's not actually, and then Castle in the Sky. Like, I'm very impressed by these because they're all hand drawn. Yes. I think that's something that people really miss nowadays is like people used to sit there and hand draw this. Not in a computer and then just copy it and put it wherever. Like they would hand draw this. And so I'm very impressed when you get this like painting type feel. But like a lot of this just veered too much on the side of weird for me.
Mhm.
And I should probably let you talk more and talk more positively about the movie, because it's not even like when I give this 2 stars, there's difference between like this being 2 stars and Columbus being 2 stars.
Mhm.
Columbus, I could appreciate at least like that it was supposed to be visually appealing or something, but I sit down, I watch it, I disliked that movie.
Yeah.
But I still understood that there was a little bit of merit to it, that it's not on the level of like a Shyamalan movie from 2010.
Yes.
But this movie, I did not feel hate towards, but I did not feel like towards. So I was just like, great, it's a 2-star movie, because that's smack in the middle of my 4-star rating. And that's how I felt. Like I can't go one way or the other with it. It is, if I could give it like whatever like is actually supposed to be the middle here, I would give it that, because it just was like. So if you want to try to sell me on positivity or talk to the fans of the movie so that they get what they want here, because at the end of the day, same thing with Edward Scissorhands, you don't like it, but Tim Burton fans love this movie. So we might as well give some credit to these movies that we have ranked so high on our list. So go ahead and spew.
So one of the big things, actually, when we're talking about the animation style, is they approached the animation for this movie differently than they normally had for anime leading up to this, in which all of the lines for the movie were recorded before the animations were drawn. So that's why it actually looks like the voices are syncing up with the animation, because the animation is made to the voices, which is not generally the way that anime is made. So that helps with the engagement of it. And then some of the animation style, there's like the shot with the bike racing off in towards the city and everything. There are points where this movie is animated so well, it's hard to realize it's an animated movie if you were just kind of like, that's the only bit that you saw.
Yeah.
It's hard not to acknowledge that. But like I said, Akira has a personal kind of place for me, because it's the moment where I realized that anime could be a medium for different types of stories. I was watching it at a time where I was kind of enjoying this dystopian fiction a lot. I mean, as a kid, when I first saw this, I was in the midst of reading things like 1984, Brave New World, Zemlyanin's We, all this dystopian fiction. So seeing another version of a dystopian fiction really appealed to me. But more importantly, my exposure to anime prior to this was through shonen animes, which are those like mainstream animes gauged toward boys aged 12 to 15, your Dragon Balls, your Narutos, things like that, or like isekais like Inuyasha or like Digimon and things like that. So seeing an actual very realized genre presented in anime fascinated me. And it really helped me dive deeper into anime because of it. And what this movie I find does really well is those moments that we are talking about. There's the big moments in this movie are big moments. The bike chase at the beginning, the Tetsuo's dream leading into the parade of toys and the giant
that part was insane. The dreams with like the stuff falling out of him and the toys. I loved those parts. Those were my favorite parts of the movie by far.
Yeah, and they're just so visually impressive. And at that point, you're just so engaged, and it's just, you're trying to figure out what's happening. And yeah, you're right. This film does fall short of saying what is happening at these points. Luckily, as we progress through the film, we do kind of get a better idea of it. But a lot of those revelations come a little too late to justify how early some of this batshit crazy stuff is happening in this movie.
Agreed.
Whereas when we finally get to a point where it's like, okay, we hear Akira's name for the first time. We're like, okay, what's Akira? And then we see that Akira is behind like a ton of layers of concrete and secure doors and stuff. And you're like, oh, is this a person? And then we finally get the reveal of Akira being the dissected parts of a person instead. And that Akira was the reason why World War III happened and all of that. And that Tetsuo was being compelled by Akira to find Akira and release Akira once again. That revelation does come really late in the movie. So you really have to kind of backpedal in your mind to remember every little thing that happened before it to see how it's relating to what's happening towards the end of this movie.
Yeah, and that's a big ask. And this is obviously, anime is very much a particular thing that appeals to a very particular person. I'm not going to sit down and watch this movie with my mom or dad, because for as much as I felt nothing during it, they would walk out of the room. And so, but I do think that this is a big ask if you're trying to get anybody even remotely new into the genre or into the medium. I think it's a big ask, because you're telling the story in such a particular way and purposely leaving out so much and constantly kind of working your way back and then telling it and bringing up these really cool, interesting elements like the dream sequences and all that. And like, what is Akira? And then at the end of the day, like, Akira's a boy. Okay, moving on.
Yeah.
Like, and then there's this big monster thing and it's eating and it's like really scary. Anaphylactic shock is kind of what it looks like. It just doesn't do it for me. Like, like it's hard, because even though I've watched all the Ghibli movies, I know that's definitely a different version of anime. At the end of the day, those are just animated movies. Like, those aren't really even anime as far as I'm concerned. Maybe the early ones, but the later ones, not really at all. When you start to like break, I've watched, I think I'm on 18 of those or whatever. I'm almost done with my watch all the way through. I still was like, I feel way too new to this genre or this style to be able to sit down and say, ooh, that's exciting. Like, it just, and I think that if you're not into this, if you're not into anime, I don't know how you get into this movie.
Yeah, and part of getting into this movie is also kind of understanding like the Japanese approach to things at this point too, and more importantly, the themes that are present in this movie. Because a lot of this movie is about nuclear experimentation. And the fallout of nuclear experimentation, as a lot of things that came out of Japan post 1945 focused on.
Yeah. Because that's what Godzilla is.
Exactly. It's a response to the things that happened in Japan. And they witness firsthand what happens when an atomic weapon is used in a populated center. So to have a Japanese movie starting off with essentially a mushroom cloud in the middle of Tokyo, that's a big deal.
Oh, yeah.
And then to work it through and to the fact where it's like we're getting to this point where there are a few lines that kind of hint at things that are going on. There's one line said by one of the kids that is like, Akira's in all of us already. Akira's power is already in all of us. So it lays into this like latent powers living within people and what awakens them. We're never actually really told why Tetsuo starts exhibiting powers. There are things hinting at it. Is it his interaction with the child?
Just when he touched it? Yeah.
There's clearly a plot throughout the film where Tetsuo is always looking for Kanata's bike. So Tetsuo seems to believe that Kanata's bike has something to do with his powers as well. And it's those little things and the experimentation. But I think the biggest plot of this is the idea of science as this big, wide-eyed, we have to follow everything to see where it goes. We have to push everything to its limits for scientific experimentation. Whereas on the opposite side of that, you have this rational military who is trying to prevent science from getting too far out of hand to prevent a disaster.
Yeah. Yeah, and I did... this was one where like the military didn't bother me too much. Sometimes in like anime, it can be a little over the top.
Yes.
Chomping on a cigar, and that's really it. That's all it does. But this one didn't actually bother me too much. I actually thought he was one of the more interesting characters with more redemptive arc. And I just thought that this movie totally lost Kanata halfway through to then turn around and make Kanata the hero of this movie. They lost him. They lost him, and that's where it lost me. Was I thought that this movie was going to be about Tetsuo. I almost thought this was going to be like Chronicle, where it was very much. I don't know. Did you see Chronicle?
Yes. Yeah.
Where Andrew is like, oh, it's all about Andrew. And then as Andrew is becoming a villain, we're still following Andrew more than we're following his friends. That's what I thought was going to happen in this movie. And it didn't go that way. And I was almost more confused by that. And then I was like, well, wait a second. Now I care about the military guy maybe the most out of all of them, because he just got banned by the government, who doesn't want anything to do with him anymore. And he just left. And like, now is he the hero? It's just weird.
It's interesting because, quite frankly, Kanata and Tetsuo are the most boring characters in this movie.
Yeah.
They, other than we get quickly established at the beginning of the movie that Tetsuo is kind of like the subordinate to Kanata, and that Kanata's always kind of been that person in charge, and Tetsuo's kind of just been his sidekick, and that this is a moment where Tetsuo all of a sudden gets that flip, where all of a sudden he does have the power to be the leader and to take control himself. But again, these are just two people who have been friends for a long time. Their relationship isn't even built up that much because Tetsuo's kind of removed from the equation so early.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And it's actually, it's this resistance and the military that are the most interesting facets of this entire movie. And it's a shame they aren't the characters that are focused more on throughout the entire thing.
Yeah, I think that would have made it better. But then it's also interesting because then when you get into like Godzilla and things like that, that's who it does focus on more. It focuses more on the scientists and the military. And then that starts to feel stale as well at times. So you have to figure out what's the best way to do this without making it feel like something we've already seen a million times, especially in Japanese movies, because that was starting to be what it was about. I mean, the fact that, Godzilla started off as like an entire, allegory, is that the right word? For World War II and the nuclear bomb. And now it has devolved into, it's going to fight King Kong. Or you could go back to Mechagodzilla, which has the greatest dropkick in movie history. But like you start to look at these, like what it became. How do you keep this fresh, and how do you keep this feeling good? And I think this movie tried to go that way. At the end of the day, I just ultimately don't think this movie was for me. And I think that's a big thing when you're watching movies and just when you're discussing movies with people in general. It's who is this movie actually for? If I were to sit down with somebody who, I know, and every Sunday they're drinking beer, watching football, and every Saturday they're drinking beer, watching college football, and every Thursday night they're drinking beer, watching football, and they watch the baseball playoffs, and they're not a movie going audience. And the guy says to me, my favorite movie of all time is like, I don't know, Old School. I'm not going to be shocked if I tell them to watch The Tree of Life and they're like, what the hell was that? It's who is this movie for? This movie just isn't for me. So I sit here and I give this movie 2 stars without any form of regret. I also hate, and this hasn't happened, but I always hate when like somebody gives a movie 2 stars. It's not for them. They pan it just because they want to pan it. And then everybody who loves that movie comes and attacks that person. And it kind of creates this, like, why did you pan the movie in the first place? If it's not like, it's different if it's like a genre that you're really pumped about. I hated Inherent Vice, and I love Paul Thomas Anderson, and I love that genre of like film noir. And I thought he just totally screwed that movie up. So that's one where I'm going to be a little bit more frustrated. Hugo, hate that movie. Going to be a little bit more frustrated because I think I like Scorsese, although we'll talk about him next week when we talk about Raging Bull. And I like movies, and I like the history of movies. But that movie I thought sucked. And so that one frustrates me more. But if it's like a genre that it's just not your genre, and it's not something that you're interested in, there's no reason to pan it. And then at the same time, there's also really no reason to take my opinion on this movie very seriously, because I'm the last person you should ask if this movie's good.
Yeah, and that's a really good way of looking at these type of opinions when it comes to just enjoying things. Just because everyone else doesn't enjoy something doesn't mean you can't enjoy something, and vice versa. And that's the beauty of cinema as a whole at this point. There is a movie out there for everyone. It might not be for
even
you,
if it's
but
Joe Dirt.
even if it's Joe Dirt, there is someone out there that movie is perfect for.
Yeah, I totally agree. What do you want to? Is that what you want to end on here with this, or should we say anything else? All right, let's move on then. John, I'm going to go first with my favorite movie of the week this week because you definitely had a better week than I did. So first, I'm going to go through all the movies I didn't like this week because I think it's necessary to address these movies. Blackfish stinks. I don't know if it's because I know the story too well at this point. I don't know if it's because it's just been like told to death. Like everybody knows the story of Blackfish. My expectations were so high for this movie, and I feel like I was dropped on my skull. I did not like it at all. I thought it was so in your face. It did nothing for me. And I was like, man, I could have made such a better documentary than this one. That's never a good feeling. I also watched Crimson Peak, the Guillermo del Toro movie. Wow, did I not like that movie. I could not believe how boring that movie was and how Guillermo del Toro, who is the master of genre, as far as I'm concerned, had no freaking clue what the genre of this movie was for the first 45 minutes. Got to get those two out of the way. I also rewatched two pretty good ones. I watched Slither and Zootopia. Slither is one of my favorite Halloween-esque movies. I always think that one's really good. Zootopia is a fun Disney movie, best one of the last decade. And I finally finished up watching every Kubrick movie. I finally watched Killer's Kiss, and I thought it was pretty good. So there we go. I'm feeling better now. I've watched every Kubrick movie. I made an official in air quotes ranking, which you can find on my Letterboxd. And then my favorite movie, though, of the week, and sorry, I just had to take digs at a couple movies there because they frustrated me like hell. Blackfish was supposed to be so much better. Yeah. I watched The Platform, which it's called El Hoyo, which I'm pretty sure translates to the hole, but it's actually called The Platform. It's a Netflix movie. And if anybody has listened to this podcast, you know that anything that Netflix makes original that isn't dark is not good. So I sat down and I watched this movie, and it's called The Platform, and I just wanted to try it. It was rated NC-17. It had a pretty cool premise. It is so awesome. It's just awesome. It's so entertaining. It's a Spanish movie, so maybe that's why it's better. Netflix American movies sometimes are just like blown up, and it's like, you know, sometimes they just overlong, like Mank, which really isn't a bad movie, but it's just so overlong. This is an hour and a half Spanish movie about a prison that is a vertical prison. And every day the food starts on the top of the prison and it works its way down. And you get whatever is left by the time it gets down to your level. And pretty much if you're on level 50, you don't eat for an entire month. It is so entertaining. If you can handle the cringe and the gruesomeness of like cannibalism and stuff like that, it is a hell of an hour and a half, and it is compelling as all get out. So that's my movie for the week. I thought that one was awesome, and it made up for a lot of duds that I watched this week that were supposed to be so much better than they were.
Well, if I'm being honest, the best thing I watched this week was just the trailer for Licorice Pizza.
Absolutely, 100%. It's the best movie of the decade. It hasn't even come out yet.
But if we're looking at the movies, it's a tough call between Touch of Evil and The Innocents. I'm continuing my James Bond rewatch. Don't worry, they're not relevant anymore. They all suck at this point. I'm into the Pierce Brosnan era. They're terrible. But I'm going to give the edge to The Innocents today. Maybe it's just because I'm in the mood for spooky season at this point with
That's
October
how
right
I've
around
been
the corner.
too.
But that movie is so delightfully terrifying the entire time. The children's performances in it are absolutely incredible. If you want a creepy kid movie, this is the creepy kid movie.
I'm going to have to check this one out. I've heard of it, but I've never actually seen it. I've seen Touch of Evil. Touch of Evil is great. People always try to say that Orson Welles is like a one-trick pony, and then his other good movies, in air quotes, are just too confusing, like The Lady from Shanghai and stuff like that. Touch of Evil is a perfect movie from beginning to end. It just gets no love because at that point it's too late and everybody already hated Orson Welles. And Charlton Heston can't act, which is why he's so damn endearing. God, I love Charlton Heston. He is so bad of an actor that it makes him unbelievable. Love Touch of Evil, but I will definitely check out The Innocents because I'm in full-on spooky season time now. That's why I watched Crimson Peak and was like, oh, that was spooky. And then that's also why I watched The Platform, because it was considered a horror, but it's 100% a thriller. So still kind of waiting on like an actual horror. But all the good horror movies that we always talk about, It Follows, The Babadook, they're not on anything. You have to pay like $4 to watch them all, and it's like, come on, just Release them as a box set of good indie horror movies at this point.
Yeah, make our lives easier. Let us find spooky movies faster.
Please. That's all I'm asking for. All right. We're going to jump over to Edward Scissorhands, which is going to make John roll his eyes for the next 30 minutes, but that's okay because I really love this movie. And so I'll preface with this. So this was one of the last Tim Burton movies I ever saw. I saw Beetlejuice, hated it. Saw the Batman movies, thought they all stunk. I saw Planet of the Apes, like I said, that's an abomination. He should be ashamed of himself. He should have never been allowed to direct after that. Sweeney Todd is boring. It wants to be cool. Pretty much anything he's done with Helena Bonham Carter isn't good. Big Eyes was pretty good. I did like that one. That's the Amy Adams one. And Big Fish, got a lot of love. It has like this massive following, and I honestly don't think it deserves it. So I was like, all right, well, I might as well watch his first two movies or two of his first movies because I know obviously Beetlejuice was in there and Batman, whatever. But I was like, I might as well watch his early movies. And I watched Ed Wood. I thought it was great. I was like, wow, he can actually make a pretty normal movie that still feels like a Tim Burton movie and whatever. And then I watched Edward Scissorhands, and this movie hit me so hard that I was like, I think I finally understand why people act like Tim Burton is a better director than he is, because they think that everything can be this level again. Rather than, Helena Bonham Carter with a gigantic head just for the sake of having a gigantic head in the Alice in Wonderland movies, he can actually make a movie where it makes sense if the guy has scissors for hands. And I love that this, and I will say this, I think this is a very, very, very American movie because of the time period that is set, because of the area where it is set, this suburbia, everything is exactly the same. This was definitely set during the racist times of America. And I think that's all very important to this movie, because this movie is that small town, nobody's worth a dime, but they all think that they're more important. And the Avon lady can't even make a sale because everybody knows who she is. And they're all like, get out of here, Peg. We don't want you here. I love the style of this movie because I think it takes Tim Burton's actual style, which is the haunted house and everything. By the way, I didn't mention Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. Woof. But anyway, it's the haunted house with Vincent Price and Johnny Depp and his appearance and all of that. And it sets it against this Blue Velvet type movie, which is something's going on in suburbia. What are all of these people's secrets? And I think it does such a good job of capturing the boredom of the housewife, the women who are just coming into the workplace, the husbands who have literally no identity because their entire life is to just work. You got to make money, Edward. That's the only thing you can do. And these kids who are growing up in this and have nothing and are trying to rebel, but they literally can't find a way to rebel because of where they live. I think it captures all of that so incredibly well that by the end of it, I'm just like, whatever, I'll just go cry on my couch because it just hits me. It just hits me. It's in my opinion, it's one of the best fish out of water movies ever made because he's a human. He just has no hands. And that is just something where like you can relate to. He just wants this one simple thing. And so often that's really what's missing in people's lives. There's always like one thing that people feel like they're missing that would make them feel so much better. And they just can't get to it. And I just think this is really this and Ed Wood are really the only two movies where I'm like, hey, Tim Burton can direct. And now let's just cut out the rest of his career and pretend it never happened.
Yeah. I do agree with the contrast Tim Burton has in the suburban area and the Gothic area of this town is phenomenal. It's by far, in my opinion, the best part of this movie, especially because the Gothic area is the more comfortable and homey space. And I think that speaks a lot to, like, again, the time area that was set and what Tim Burton's going for in this movie, but it just doesn't hit me. And maybe it is because, like you said, this is a very Americanized movie. Maybe I just don't get some of those aspects because I didn't grow up in a place like suburbia where there is a suburbia where like all the houses look the same, just in different colors. Like that didn't hit me. I never had like the Avon lady coming on. but it also has that small town vibe, which is just so contrasting from my experiences of living in a small town that it just doesn't hit me.
Yeah,
in any way.
And that's fine. I mean, I would say, so this reminds me, when I look at how my grandparents were living when they were having kids, this is how they were living. Like, it's insane. When they tell stories, and they still do it, 3 of my 4 grandparents are still alive. So, like, my grandmother just moved for the first time out of the town that she lived in pretty much her whole life. And she doesn't like know what to do because she's used to just being able to walk the dog and run into people she knows while she's smoking a cigarette. And that's what she's doing. And this whole like when my grandparents first moved into their house in 1963 and literally lived there until my grandpa died in April of this past year. And my grandma still lives in that house, 60 years almost. Like, this is what that town looked like then.
Yeah.
Everybody knew everybody. Every guy was the same thing. And that's what I think is so interesting about this movie is it still dives into the identity of men of this era in America, because very much we're always told that in like the 50s and 60s, men are the ones who really controlled everything. And they did control a lot of it. But by controlling so much, they made themselves all the same. We always hear about the sad housewife. When we watch The Hours, we see what Julianne Moore's character goes through in that movie and Toni Collette's character in that movie. But John C. Reilly's character is the one who's probably, he's the one who, everything's so great, I can't believe I'm this lucky. And then he gets left by his wife because he's just like every other guy. And this movie does that. The Kathy Baker's character, her husband she's definitely cheating on her husband. There's no doubt about it. And her husband is just that guy who's showing up. Hey, what's going on, kid? Ha ha ha. And he's like showing up to all these parties. And Alan Arkin is the exact same way, except his wife actually cares because his wife is starting to break away from what the women of this era were doing instead of just sitting around with rollers in her hair and waiting on the kids and then running out to the corner to gossip. But he does such a good job of looking at the men and how, Anthony Michael Hall's character is going to grow up to be just like all of them. And there's literally nothing he can do about it. His dad is filthy rich and he's still going to have to go and do all of these things so that he can be just like his dad, which it seems like it's a miserable thing. The cars backing out of the driveway at the same time. Everybody sitting in their chairs in the driveways. It's all stuff that was happening in the 50s, 60s of America when they were just starting to build these, massive, massive developments where every single house was just a carbon copy of each other.
Yeah, and the gender roles in this film are portrayed in a way where like you can see, again, you see where Tim Burton's going with it. He's definitely looking at this idea that like there are specific roles for each gender in this generation, and it's our character that goes away from them that really helps highlight them at the same time. This entire movie is just about contrast.
That's all it is. It's exactly it. I mean, and you get the contrast in the way the story is being told, where you have the character. She takes Edward to the salon and she starts taking off her clothes and all of that. And we've seen her the whole movie, and everybody knows exactly what she is in this town. And then as soon as Edward breaks into the house, she's going, oh, he pretty much tried to rape her. Like that's like where the story, it's this immediate switch, how quickly people will flip on each other because of the gossip and because like whatever makes the better story, whatever saves from the embarrassment, whatever makes you feel better about the situation you were just in. We see so much of that. And we see this one person who has a heart, who really wants to do the right thing, who just is different from everybody else, not be treated right. And who's the one who helps him at the end? It's the black cop, because the black cop during this time, he's a cop, but he gets no respect from everybody else. And even though they really never get into race at all in this movie, he is the only black person in this movie.
Yeah.
So there's a reason why he's the one who is not shooting Edward at the end of this movie and is letting Edward go. There's such a look at all of these dynamics, and it's all told through just this weird guy who can't take off this black suit thing because he was made by a inventor.
Well, and that's the other thing that Tim Burton does do well in this movie is you kind of forget that Edward's a robot.
Mm-hmm.
Because he's very clearly a robot. They show him, like, they show the plans that were used to make him very clearly a robot. And at that point, what that allowed to have happen here, though, is that we got this kind of like childish look into this world. The childish naivety of everything, of not understanding the way the world works, which lets us investigate this world that Tim Burton's portraying.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And I think so what I don't like about later Burton movies is Burton goes all in on his own style. He goes for the German expressionism and he doesn't do it all that well. He's all style over substance. That's all he is. And I know you wrote that in your review for this movie, but I do disagree on this one because I think that he is delving into all of these tropes. He's really taking a look. Like, Americans were always scared. What's the house on the haunted hill? And to have Vincent Price play that role.
Yeah.
Vincent Price, who is literally Pit and the Pendulum, House on Haunted Hill, all those movies. That is what he does. That was his whole career, was just having a cool voice. Fright Night, just having a cool voice and doing that. Like, to have him play that role and actually make that part of this movie, that house is the least frightening house out of all of them. Because there is something a lot more disturbing going on in every single other house. Blue Velvet does this exact same thing. And Blue Velvet probably would have been on my list if I had seen it more recently, but it's been a very long time. Is it on your list?
I haven't seen it.
Oh, you haven't seen it. So Blue Velvet.
I haven't seen it.
Well, I won't spoil it, and I think it'll end up being on your list. It was near the bottom of my top 100 when I originally made this back in like 2010 or something. But I haven't seen it in so long. But it does this same thing. It's the every house looks the same. They're all watering it, but then there's a murder going on, and there's something really wrong going on. And that's what this movie's doing. But instead of getting into a murder, it's just getting into all of the behind the scenes of these families, the religious person and what's going on with her, and the lady with the rollers and the lady who's trying to sleep with every repairman who comes into her house. Like, all of these characters are just, there's something so wrong with all of them.
Yeah.
And but it's all internal. And their houses look perfect. Their lawns are perfect. Their families look perfect. But there's something so much more wrong with them than with the guy who lives in the disheveled house that's been completely ignored, that's on the haunted hill, that he's got scissors for hands. It's a nice little touch, but then Burton also makes it so that by the time you care about Edward, now it's time to bring it so that everybody else has to attack him and get him out of here. And Winona Ryder, I don't really think she's a very good actress, but I love her in this movie. I think she plays the role as well as she needs to, and the little subtleties throughout of when she actually starts to fall for him and care for him in this way, I think is so important to the storytelling of this movie.
Absolutely. So I have a question for you.
Yes.
Why does Peg go into the house in the first place?
Because she's trying to sell the Avon stuff.
Do you think that's the only motivation she has going into the house?
What do you think the other motivation is, out of curiosity?
Well, I mean, we were talking about how everything's the same in this town. Everyone knows everyone in this town and everything. So there's an insinuation here that Peg has no idea what's going on in this house, who lives in that house. So I actually think Peg was trying to break out of this cycle of everything that's going on in this town to make things different. And then that's why, I mean, it's absurd. The plot of this movie is absurd. And not because the main character has scissors for hands. This woman literally goes into opens the door into someone's house, finds a person who doesn't understand English essentially, and has scissors for hands, and is just like, yeah, I'm going to just take this person and raise them now.
Yep.
That's it. That's crazy.
But also, John, and this is what's so important. The beginning and the end of this movie is what? It's someone telling the story.
Yes.
So all of it could be total fabrication.
Yeah.
And I think that's those bookends with Winona Ryder as the old woman telling the story is so important to this movie, because it lets, at least in my opinion, it lets you let your sense of reality down a little bit, because she's telling the story to a 4-year-old, 5-year-old, 6-year-old girl who's her granddaughter. She's probably exaggerating just a little bit on some of what's going on. And hell, at the end of the day, she might just be making up a fairy tale about this guy who everybody just didn't like, so that her granddaughter doesn't grow up to be a mean person.
Yeah, it's very true, right? Because let's bring it back again with our unreliable narrator here. And what's the instigator for this story is, why is it snowing here?
Yep.
Right? And it's like, maybe she's just trying to find a reason to say.
It's the same thing when we get really bad thunderstorms. I don't even know if you get those in Vancouver, but we get really bad thunderstorms out on the East Coast. Okay. In California, we never got them, but you get really bad thunderstorms. My grandma would be like, yeah, they're bowling. And she'd tell me this whole story about everybody who's up there, God and the angels, they're all bowling. That's what they're doing. It's a different version than this. Obviously, my grandmother didn't tell me an hour and a half story where people went through trials and tribulations, but you try to tell something to kids to make them feel more comfortable or to give them this hope that it does come. He's almost like a Santa Claus at the end of the day. He's this figure more than anything.
Yeah. And now that I'm thinking about it more and stuff, one of the issues we have in society is that we like sugarcoating things for kids. And we like coming up with these ideas rather than respecting a child's intelligence and like their ability to comprehend things. We often come up with ways of explaining things that are just completely false. And it's honestly a really bad practice for us to have, where we should just be straight up with kids. Tell them what's happening. If there is a scientific reason for something happening, let them know. But you raise this good point where maybe this is just that type of story happening, while she's also reminiscing about an actually fairly normal person who was just kind of ostracized by the community.
It literally could just be a love story where she just blew it out of proportion. I very much think that Edward in this movie is a real person. But also, you see how much snow is coming out that window. It's not that much. But it's almost like so again, though, and this goes back and this is why I love this movie. And these are all the little things that I think that just add up to create such a great movie-going experience. But again, what does this Edward actually do? He brings snow to a place where snow never happened. Yeah. And maybe it's not actually snow, but whoever Winona Ryder is telling this story about changed this town, or at least changed her perspective on this town in a way that totally changed her life. And it seems like she never was able to move on from that because she's still living in the same town. And of course she's going to reminisce on how great those times were, because she's clearly not gone very far. She has a family. That's established, all that, but she hasn't left. And so it's almost like when that person left, she waited around for that person to come again. Whether it's Edward Scissorhands or it's just some made up character, it's some long lost love. It doesn't matter what it is, but it adds to that snow. It's the romanticizing of this and what it means to her.
No, that's a really good point that I didn't really consider enough in watching it. And how this is really just kind of her saying, I realized that this place was not what it seemed. And I mean, it's a world-shattering thing to have that happen when you all of a sudden realize that this community you're a part of, that does seem so straightforward and cookie cutter, turns out to be something completely different from what you expected. I just think that there are other movies that have the same concept and approach it in a better way.
Yeah, and I think it's all preference. Like I can get behind, I always say, like, an adult fairy tale, if it's told right, there's really not much better, in my opinion. Like, I love like Shape of Water, this, The Princess Bride. Like, I love those types of movies where, like, they can take a pretty serious topic and they can make it feel childish. Like, it's a grim fairy tale and you're just watching this. And so Pan's Labyrinth is another one that's kind of got that adult fairy tale thing going on. Yeah. I think when those are done right, they really are some of the most interesting concepts. And this is a genre that, like, this is a movie that I think just does a really good job within that genre. But if you're not into that genre, it's probably not going to be something you're going to latch onto because it's weird. I mean, it's a weird movie. And it is also one of those movies, like, you know, something I noticed with Akira is I wasn't really into how weirdly paced some of the dialogue is, or like they don't answer when they should answer because now they're walking and the timing feels off. This movie has a lot of similar stuff like that. There are some scenes where it's like, it seems like that reaction shot is taking much longer than how people actually talk or how people actually act. But I think it's an interesting concept to like look at this adult who's essentially a child, bring him into this completely different environment and try to train him in those ways, when in reality everything he's doing is for the benefit of those that he feels the closest to. I always love the scene with ethics. Who would you do? What would you do with the money? Well, I'd give it to the ones who are like my family and friends. No, that's wrong. Everybody knows you would turn it in. You're stupid. Well, you turn it in. What are the cops going to do with it? If they don't find anybody, where does that money go? Does it go to the government? Do the cops just take it? Like, yeah, maybe giving it to your loved ones is the right answer. Stop trying to say the right thing and just do what you think is right. And it's this like you said, naivete of, hey, I'm just going to do what I think is right because that's all I know.
Yeah, and I mean that brings up another theme of this movie, and that's like the commodification and of like the bizarre and the strange, and the taking something different or something useful and just exploiting the crap out of it. Because that's what it comes down to. Edward, he is naive, but he also has this unique talent that he can provide, and everyone takes advantage of it until it's so easy to scapegoat him as this villain.
When he did nothing, and I think that's what makes you connect with him. I mean, yeah, it's very like the movie itself is very manipulative. It definitely like pushes, like it's forcing you to feel a certain way. It's not giving you options to feel a different way. But I think it's useful in this one because you should feel bad for Edward. Because at the end of the day, like he's coming into this world where everybody's looking at him like he's a weirdo, but he probably sees all these people as weird too. And it's kind of that whole concept of aliens land on Earth. We're all going to be like, what the heck is going on? But if we landed on another planet where there were aliens, we're going to look just as weird to them as they're going to look to us. Yeah, so, exactly. That's kind of what this movie's getting to. They're trying to mold him to be whatever it is that's happening in this community. And that community is full of flaws and full of issues.
It really does. It really is like this nice investigation into society and how like the idea of putting a square peg into a round hole. And the fact that really it's not about having someone fit into the society sometimes, but sometimes for the society to be more open to a diverse group of people.
Yeah. And they were all about him when he could cut their hair and cut their dog's hair and do their hedges and all. But then they ran out of uses for him. So now they don't need him because now he's just a villain. He robbed. Nobody even looks at anybody else. It's just him. And then when he saves the child at the end when the car's coming, like, oh, he's trying to hurt him. He's trying to kill him, blah, blah, blah. Peg and Alan Arkin, they're not doing anything about it. They don't hold it against him, but he's got to go because there's no way that the town is ever not going to turn on them. They're losing their social status because of this guy. And that was a time where you didn't stand up in that way. But I want to say I love Alan Arkin in this movie. I love Alan Arkin in everything he's in, but I think Alan Arkin is just such a good 50s dad in this movie. All of his little quips, all the things he says, everything he does where he's just drinking beer in a lawn chair. Hey, turn up the music, clipping the hedges, like without even really paying attention. When he's got his secret bottle of whiskey or whatever. I love him in this movie. I think he's so entertaining. I love his interactions at the dinner table with Edward the entire time. I just think he does a really good job with it. And Alan Arkin, man, such a good actor. Can't wait to talk about Little Miss Sunshine when we finally get there. Anyway, all right. Well, let's stop this one since neither one of us really liked either one's movies. But let's talk about Licorice Pizza real quick because that's coming out. We just watched the trailer for it. The new Paul Thomas Anderson movie, which looks like a Richard Linklater movie dressed up as a Paul Thomas Anderson movie. I cannot wait. This is literally the genre. See, now this is a movie that I will hate if it doesn't live up to my expectations because this is the genre. This is my genre. I love Linklater. I love PTA. This coming of age, whatever this is going to be with the music and all that, this is exactly the type of movie that I am looking for. This movie was made for me. Now it better live up to that hype, but this trailer is freaking ridiculous.
Oh, at the moment that I started watching it, and like Bowie's Life on Mars starts playing, which is one of my favorite Bowie songs.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just like everything. I've been anticipating this movie since before we knew anything about it. As soon as I found out it was coming this year, and in seeing this trailer, I'm just incredibly hyped.
I can't wait. I'm so excited. PTA let me down a couple times, but not too much, but wasn't an Inherent Vice guy. I didn't like that movie really at all. And I hope this is him kind of getting back to his Boogie Nights, Magnolia roots, where it's like good soundtrack, all focused on characters. Like, let's just dive in. Let's dive into each one of them individually. I know you have The Master very high. That's a pretty polarizing movie. It pretty much had everything I want. It just doesn't have the soundtrack. I want him to go back to the soundtrack, hit the era, and just hit me in the feels. I like that they have Elena Haim playing the lead. Wouldn't expect that really at all. Bradley Cooper literally just looks like Ben Affleck in Dazed and Confused. So that'll be an interesting little riff there. That's for sure. But
plus Cooper Hoffman.
Cooper Hoffman. Yes, Cooper Hoffman. And Sean Penn. Yeah, I'm coming for you, Nancy. Okay, sure, whatever. I can't wait to watch it. I'm very excited for that movie.
Very excited.
All right, next week we are moving on to our number 65. 65. Can't believe it. We're getting there, everybody. We are moving right along. We have 10 Cloverfield Lane from 2016 as John's and Raging Bull from 1980 as mine. So that is next week. We'll have to figure out what day because I'm going to be out of town from Thursday through Sunday. So we'll have to figure out how to get that one in beforehand and make sure that I don't overwhelm myself too much. But 10 Cloverfield Lane and Raging Bull, those are the ones next week. And then we get into, well, that's still spooky season with Cloverfield Lane. So yeah, Cloverfield Lane, Scream, and The Birds all back to back to back. So that should be pretty good. But yeah, that's it. Hope you all enjoyed this. Go watch Survivor, John, and I will see everybody